Hello and welcome to Something Rhymes with Purple. And as the Purple people know very well by now, this is a podcast about words and language. It's about your questions that have always vexed you over the years that you can then put to me and to Gyles Brandreth, who is sitting opposite me on screen at least. Hello, Gyles. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well indeed. I'm conflicted because now we're well into January. Most people I know have taken down their Christmas lights, but I'm keeping mine up. I'm keeping mine up until the 2nd of February.
Yes, I've been quoting you about this because I had the dilemma. It's always after New Year falls. I then sort of think, is it time? Is it time? I know that's not the official time, but every single year you tell me that you and Michelle keep your tree up for weeks. And I kind of wonder how you stand it, but then equally I'm quite envious that you let yourselves do that. So explain, what's the rationale?
Well, the rationale is this. Most people think of the 12 days of Christmas coming to an end on 12th night, which is officially Epiphany. It's a Christian feast day. It marks the arrival of the wise men, the Magi, at the manger in the Bible story. And that's when Christmas comes to an end, and that's when traditionally people take down their Christmas decorations in the British Isles. There are parts of the world where Christmas isn't celebrated until the 6th of January, Epiphany. But normally people think that's when decorations come down by midnight on the 6th of January. But there is a school of thinking that the Christmas season, the festival, goes on until Candlemas, which is the 2nd of February. And because I love the idea of Christmas lights and I like to see the Christmas tree getting balder and balder as the weeks go by, we just keep ours up until the 2nd of February. But you can do whatever you fancy.
Do you replant your Christmas tree?
We have done in the past. Yeah. This year, we are not. But I'm hoping, because our street is littered with Christmas trees, I'm hoping that they're recycled in some way. Do you think they are?
Yes, I do. I think the councils have been amazing, actually, because they have collection points, don't they? So, yes, I do think they are recycled.
Do you know, we had a New Year disaster. I woke up and there was this beep, 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 going on in the background, and I went down to the basement and I discovered that in the boiler room where the boiler lives, there was carbon monoxide escaping, and the carbon monoxide machine was beeping. I couldn't turn it off, so I had to remove the battery, but there was not really smoke, but there was kind of fug in the air and an unpleasant smell, and it turned out that something had gone wrong with the boiler. So we managed to turn it all off, but
Thank goodness for the alarm.
Yeah, thank goodness for the alarm. It shows it's worthwhile. Yeah. But of course, we couldn't raise any plumber immediately. So we are still, but it's quite exhilarating. We've turned off the boiler, so we don't have hot water. But we do, I don't quite know how it works. We do have a tap that emits boiling water.
So you're bathing in the sink. Otherwise, you're experiencing that caglaff, remember? The shock of cold water. Caglaff, remember? The Scots word for the shock of cold water as it hits you.
Well, I want us to talk today about light and flame, and it's still dark, whether we have our Christmas lights up or down, whether the boiler's working or not. How grateful we are for illumination, aren't we? So have we discussed this before? Have we ever talked about
we did do an episode on energy, which covered light briefly. It was called Electric. And that had lots of things about light sources, etc. But this time we're talking more about fixtures, the kind of basics, aren't we?
Good.
It sounds very boring, but actually there's some lovely etymology here.
Good. Well, I mean, we couldn't start with the very word flame, could we? The reason I think of that is that I had to get down on my hunkers to see if the light was still burning in the boiler.
Light, yeah.
The pilot light was burning in the boiler. And that's a little flame that flickers. Where does the word flame come from?
Yeah, so we've got pilot and flame here. So the flame is simply from the Romans, flamma, which is why we have flammable and inflammable, and that perennial question, why do they both mean the same thing, which we talked about before, and it's because the in there is an intensifier, not a negator. And the pilot is simply, it's just like a TV pilot, really. It's the idea of something leading the way. In other words, it's the beginning of something, and the pilot light, of course, is essential to the workings of your heating and hot water, etc., as you have discovered. Do you remember, in our childhood, it happened much, much more, that we would have power cuts. I used to find them so romantic. I used to actively look forward to power cuts because out would come the torches and the candles. And do you remember? It was something quite just quite wonderful and enchanting for me, obviously not for my parents. But yeah, a torch, I think we did possibly cover in electric. It comes from the Latin torquere, to twist, because if you think about it, the original torches, if you imagine a sort of ancient Greek or ancient Rome drama, you will see some sort of twisted hemp or fibre that had been soaked in a flammable or inflammable substance and then lit to give light. So it comes from the idea of twisting. And from that, we also get extortion, twisting something out of someone else. We get a retort, which is the idea of twisting back. You get torture, which is twisting or torment. And you get contort, torment. Oh, you get so many things from that one verb, torquere.
Well, talk of torquere, with our torch, you do have to, it's a battery torch, you do have to twist the top of it to turn it on. I think you're just putting the bulb so that it actually touches the battery. You twist it to turn it on. Yeah. It's a nightmare when the fuse goes. But I remember as a child when the fuse went, you had to actually redo the fuse yourself. There was a kind of wire, little filament that you put through. I can picture my father doing it.
That was when I pronounced myself an independent woman, was when I could first do that and connect the brown wire to the, to earth it and all of those. That's when I just thought, okay, I'm all right now. I can stand on my own 2 feet.
Brilliant. All I do now is there's a switch. I seem to think when it goes, you come down with the torch, you wave it around at the box and you find the switch that's gone down and you push it up again and you hope the lights go on.
Yes.
Okay. Take us through some more of these words to do with light and darkness and turning things on.
Well, the history of street lighting is something I have been looking into because I'm not sure I really knew the whole history of it. So obviously, lamps, torches, etc. have been used since ancient civilizations, really. So they've been used for security and to protect people from tripping up or keeping robbers at bay. So we had oil lamps, and in the ancient times, particularly in Roman times, you would have a slave who was exclusively responsible for lighting the oil lamps in front of the villas. And then in medieval times, you would have so-called link boys, and these escorted people from one place to another. So literally they would be hired, if you like, much like a cabbie, to accompany someone going out with a torch so that they would light their way. And then public street lighting, I think, really began in Paris because the Parisian parliament said that a torch had to be lit at every intersection of the road. And then again, you would hire a lantern bearer. I think it was Louis XIV who then sort of actually authorised proper legislation that said that lighting must be installed and then it must be maintained, etc. And so that was really the beginning. And then in France, again, there was an oil lantern called a reverbère, which produced a much brighter light, and they were attached to the top of lampposts. And then the first lights with gas, I think, was demonstrated in Pall Mall in 1807. And then today, of course, we have high intensity, what's called discharge lamps, apparently, although we are experimenting with LED and induction lights. I think Milan was the first to have those. So it's been quite a journey.
I always feel more comfortable when there are street lamps. I mean, I feel more secure. And I tell you what I also love is I love elegant street furniture. And today's, the modern street lamp for me,
it's very ugly.
It's not as beautiful.
No.
Living in London as I do, I'm often walking across the great bridges that traverse the Thames. And on many of the older ones, they still have Victorian and maybe even pre-Victorian street lamps that
really
are so elegant to look
at. Yeah, they're beautiful.
I know that there's a Davy lamp. Is that something to do with mining? And obviously there was a person called Davy. Or is it something to do with the sea? Which is it?
Oh, yeah, no, nothing to do with the sea. I loved this period of history. I remember the history of mining and the safety of mining, etc. So the Davy lamp was invented in 1815 by Sir Humphrey Davy. And essentially it's a wick lamp, but the flame is enclosed inside a mesh screen. And it was created to reduce the very real danger of explosions from methane and other flammable gases called fire damp. So it was the kind of the mesh screen essentially that would protect the flame, and then that would flicker or go out according to the presence of these gases.
Susie, can I ask you something? Did you just tell me the origin of lantern? Have you just told me that?
I know. I don't think I did tell you the origin of lantern.
Because I thought I thought, oh, this is terrible. I want to know what the origin of lantern is. And I thought, maybe she told me 5 minutes ago. I have a feeling my mind is going, you know. But fortunately, in this instance, it isn't. Tell me, what is the origin of the word lantern?
So I don't think I actually told you about lamp either, which goes back to the Greek lampada and the Latin as well. So again, from ancient times. And that
forgive me, what does lampada mean?
Lampada goes back, as does lantern, to a Greek verb meaning to shine. So it's all about shining. Do you remember it's called Bunsen burners? How were you at chemistry?
I was appalling at chemistry, but I do remember the Bunsen burner. And that,
yes,
like Davy, it's an eponym, isn't it? Named after somebody Bunsen.
It is. And once again, we've covered this we had a chemistry episode where you and I struggled a little bit, but it was quite entertaining. Purpurium, it was called. And yeah, Bunsen burner is an eponym named for Robert Bunsen, or Robert Bunsen. He was a German chemist who introduced it in 1855. Although he probably did modify an earlier design by Michael Faraday. So yes, I loved that.
Mentioning school days takes me back to my first torch that I remember having as a child. I was sent to boarding school when I was quite young, and I had my torch with me. And my torch was one that had 3 different colours. It was yellow, that was the main colour, you know, like a normal light. And then it had you could twist it, and a green bulb came on, or maybe it was a green filter that made the light look green, and there was a red as well. What I loved, after lights out, which happened quite early, I would hide under the bedclothes with my torch and read a book. And if it was something like Sherlock Holmes, I would read it using the yellow light, unless I got to a grisly bit when I turned on the red light. Or if I got to a spooky bit, I turned on the green light. So I created my own lighting effects while
fantastic.
Reading the book under the bedclothes. What I didn't know was that I could be seen reading, because the light shone through the red. And so apparently matron would come in and would see that one was reading under the bedclothes. But if it was only 8:30, you were allowed to. And then she came back at 9 o'clock. And if you were still reading, then she would say, come on now, lights out. And you had to turn out the torch as well.
Oh, and then sneak it back on at midnight?
No, funnily enough, I've always been a bit of a goody-goody. So when matron said lights out after that extra half hour, I obediently turned off my light, pretending that I didn't acknowledge her presence. I mean, she just stood at the door and said, lights out now. And I turned off the torch and tucked it under the pillow.
Well, back to candles, because candles have inspired lots of different idioms, really, given their importance in life. I suppose that's not surprising. So just a reminder that the Latin candela, which gave us candle, looks back to candere, to be white or shine or glisten. And we talked about candidate a lot. Political candidate used to be a white toga wearer in Roman times. But we also get the chandelier. As I was growing up, I think it was some parents' ultimate ambition to have a chandelier somehow.
So is a chandelier the same thing as a candelabra? It's just a different version of the same word?
It absolutely is, yeah. So both of them from Latin. And actually, ceremonial sort of lighting is also important. We should probably mention that. So you remember the ornamental brackets that are called sconces. They're sort of candle holders attached to a wall, if you like. Yeah. That goes back to a Latin word, abscondere, to hide, which of course gave us abscond as well, because it was essentially a lantern with a device for concealing the light originally. So you almost this sort of early version of turning it on and off. You have the menorah, the candelabrum used in Jewish worship. Worth pointing out, by the way, that candelabrum, if you want to be a stickler for your grammar, that is the singular. So it's a candelabrum and a candelabra. Strictly speaking, is the plural.
Is that really a candelabrum? Is like a candlestick? It's just got one candle.
Yes. And candelabra, as I say, more than one. We also have, just talking about devices, we have the pricket. And the pricket candle is a sharply pointed candlestick. So on its sharp metal point, a candle is stuck to hold it in its place. Again, that reminds me of sort of ancient times, really, where you would see prickets and those sconces everywhere. It's very romantic, isn't it? Having sort of, flaming light. In fact, many people on their Christmas trees actually light candles, don't they, in a ceremonial way?
Well, when I was a child, I don't know, it was our whole home must have been the most terrible fire hazard, because on the Christmas tree, we had little pegs, like clothes pegs, attached to which were candles.
Yes.
And we lit my father with his cigarette lighter, because I'm afraid he was a smoker, which is why he's no longer here. He would light the candles with his cigarette lighter all over the tree.
No, I went to a friend's this very Christmas and saw exactly the same thing, and I don't think I'd ever seen it, but it was glorious. If you can suspend your slight anxiety, it is a glorious sight, really, when you switch all the lights off and have these candles. But in terms of idioms, you can't hold a candle to someone else. So if you can't hold a candle to someone else, it means you're nowhere near as good as them. And that's simply a nod to an assistant standing next to their superior with a candle, much like those street lantern holders, to provide light to work by, essentially. And so the idea of holding a candle to someone else became synonymous with helping them in a sort of menial way or in a subordinate way. And if you are not worth the candle, it means that you're not even good enough to hold a candle for someone else, if that makes sense. What we haven't mentioned, Gyles, are the components that you might find on those upper floors, like plugs and fuses and bulbs, etc. We talked about the fuse and how, we once had to know the inner workings of a plug. Nowadays, we just literally flick out the fuse and put one back in. That actually goes back to a Latin word meaning spindle, not connected to the fuse in fusion, which actually is from the Latin fundere, to melt, because when something fuses together, it almost melts together, which means that fusion and fondue, strangely, are siblings. But the fuse in a light fixture is from that Latin word meaning spindle because of the shape and the function. You've been plugging your book quite a lot. Do you remember plugging?
I have. Indeed, and we must plug our live shows in a moment. The plug that goes into the wall, that gives you the electricity from the appliance, from the electric socket. Is that the same plug as when we're out plugging our wares?
It is, really. So plug itself, in the object sense, that goes back to a German word plugger. It can get more Germanic than that. Ultimately, we don't know where that comes from. But when we plug our books or our wares, the idea is that you are literally kind of putting energy into it and showing, casting light upon it, actually, if we talk about light. So it's kind of giving it some fizz, giving it some energy. So it is actually connected, and obviously it's a metaphorical application there. A bulb is so named simply because of its shape. It goes back to the Greek word bulbous, which means an onion or some kind of bulbous root vegetable. So again, shape-wise. And filament, I talked about how lighting is threading its way through our language. Well, filament goes back to the Latin filum, simply meaning a thread.
Good. Speaking of plugging things, you very kindly gave a little plug to the puzzle that I've devised, which I'm calling Full Rainbow, that I've put online. I began it on Boxing Day. And it's just, it's for people who like anagrams. There's no commercial element to it at all. I just thought, this is a fun puzzle. Why don't we give it a go?
There's no commercial element to it until the New York Times buys it, let's face it.
Well, rest assured, I'll let you, when that happens, maybe even the Pontefract Observer.
Half a percentage.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. You heard it here first. Half a percentage is yours. No problem whatsoever. It's just, I love rearranging letters to form words. And sometimes you do it in a clever way. Like my favorite one is to take the 6 letters in the word Monday, Monday, and rearrange them to form the word dynamo. Mm-hmm. But this is much simpler. I just take 7 letters of the alphabet and present them in alphabetical order and invite whoever wants to play the game to arrange those letters to form an everyday English word.
And it's so unmistakably yours as well. I smiled when it was onwards, because every email you ever send me finishes with onwards ! You're
right. So. I have thought of all the words myself, which is including tosspot. And my wife said,
I haven't seen tosspot. Was that in there?
Maybe it hasn't appeared yet. I mean, I've had to do 360. I've had to do 365 words. I've done a year's worth. Okay. And my wife said, you can't include tosspot. I said, I can.
As we know. Innocent beginnings.
It's a good word, but she didn't allow me pisspot. But she said, because I think that's hyphenated, and it probably is. So there's no pisspot,
I don't
but
think
there is
it
a
is
tosspot.
Actually, but I think that might
really?
be a
I could have pisspot. Oh
well,
then
I think I'm not sure the New York Times would be interested if you actually include words like that. Yeah, no, not hyphenated.
Well,
but it does say vulgar slang.
It's been great fun doing it, and all people have to do is go online, www.fullrainbow, those 2 words, full rainbow, together, all one word, .co.uk, and you find the puzzle. And there's a sort of training ground where you can have a go at it, and then you just play it, a different one every day. And have you done it a few times?
I've done it every day. I haven't done today's one, actually. I have to say, I found it a little bit... There was one at the beginning. There were some that have been sort of fairly obvious, like support, I think, was quite an easy one. But there was one at the beginning that really foxed me, and I had to get a clue. I can't remember which one it was. But then you get into the rhythm of it.
Oh, well done. You haven't had any rainbows yet. If you don't get it, you get a rainbow. But you do get a little nugget of philosophy from me. With your answer, as well as choosing my 365 words, I chose 365 little sayings, quotations.
Oh, I haven't seen those. I think I've missed those. Okay.
If you share.
Oh, I don't share. Yeah.
Well, you can share with me. Then you're sharing with a safe friend. You'll find you're sharing a little nugget of wisdom
from nice.
Everybody. And then A to Z, it's literally from Aristotle to Benjamin Zephaniah. They're all in there.
Okay, sounds like our bonus podcast episode.
So that's a bit of fun. Fullrainbow.co.uk. That's enough plugs, and that's probably enough light. We've shed enough light on the matter.
Yes, because we have some correspondence. And the first one that's come in is from Emma Burns.
Dear Susie and Gyles, greetings from Sydney, Australia. I've been relaxing during the Merineum by reading a wonderful book called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. At one point in the book, the author describes a character as plum scared. Plum spelled Plumb. Why do we say plum scared? Is it related to plumbing or the element lead? Would love to hear any insights or stories. Thank you so much for the podcast. The show is my favorite to listen to during walks with my dog Jasper. All the best, Emma.
Oh, I like the sound of Emma, and I like the sound of Jasper, too. That's the sort of name to have for a dog. Jasper, Jasper, sit, Jasper. Plum. What's the answer to this one?
Well, Emma's kind of halfway there, really, because she says, is it related to plumbers and to lead? And with those two thoughts, she has actually connected us to Roman plumbers and medieval plumbers because they dealt in and worked with lead, which was called plumbum. And it wasn't until the 19th century that plumber was applied solely to people trained in fitting and repairing water pipes, which, of course, were originally made of lead as well. So it is that idea of plumb that gives us the original meaning of plumb itself, which was a ball of lead attached to a string that was used to determine a vertical line at sea, or, sounding lead use for measuring the depth of water, particularly a plumb line. And to plumb the depths of a body of water was to measure its depth in this way. So plummet also goes back to that meaning to sort of drop straight down, to plunge, which I guess, is not something you would necessarily connect. If you do something with a plumb, you are doing it straight as a plumb line. And this is where we get the idea of something which is plumb scared, plumb anything really, as Emma has asked, because it means directly, vertically, or exactly as straight as a plumb depth going into the water. So if you are plumb scared, you are directly, definitely, and precisely scared, if that makes sense.
And there's no connection with the fruit at all, Plum.
None at all. On its own. No, none at all.
So it's plum as from plumbere.
Silent
Latin.
B. And you'll remember that it was probably Renaissance scribes translating from Latin into English who saw the word plumber and thought, well, we have to show off its Latin heritage. So they inserted a B, and we've never pronounced it, of course, but they wanted to show that it goes back to plumbum because they wanted to keep the integrity and purity and classical history of our language. So hence the silent B. But thanks, Emma. That was a lovely question.
Thank you, Susie. You know so much. It's fantastic. If you want to be in touch, it's simply, you can email us. It's purple@somethingelse.com, and something is spelt without a G, just for reasons of perversity. Who's next in touch? Oh, Ricky Wainwright. Hello, Gyles and Susie. Listening to Gyles, it occurred to me that waxing lyrical is a strange expression, and I wondered where it came from. Love the show. I enjoy name-dropping stories, and I'm amazed how many people Gyles has met. Well, Ricky, now I've met you in a roundabout sort of way, here on Something Rhymes with Purple. Well, waxing lyrical. What's the origin of that?
Well, this is not the same as waxing your legs, waxing your skis, etc. This means growing or becoming. And for anyone who knows their German, this will make sense because the German wachsen, W-A-C-H-S-E-N, means to grow. And it's used for the tide waxes and wanes, it grows and then it recedes. So does the moon. Oh, that's an optical illusion. So when you wax lyrical, you are becoming or growing or becoming growingly lyrical. So increasingly effusively. So it's all about more rather than less. That is why we wax lyrical, we become or we grow lyrical. So we have the Germans to thank for that.
Gosh. Now, look, Susie, a question you're often asked, and people, I imagine, because you do your own shows, I know, and do you find that people are asking the same sort of questions time and again?
Yes, I do. And I thought it would be lovely to put some of these in. I'm not going to credit them because I'm bound to leave out so many people who have asked me this question. But this is a sort of slot which I think we can introduce whereby I just try to answer one of the most popular questions, if you like, which many, many people have asked me over the years. Countdown viewers, Radio Times readers, and of course, the wonderful purple people. And this is about a white elephant. Why do we call an unwanted but troublesome gift a white elephant? And it's got a slightly curious and lovely history, quite a famous one really, so I'm sure some of the purple people will know. So pale elephants were once highly revered, and when born or found, particularly in Thailand, or Siam as it used to be called, it became the immediate property of the king, so precious was it considered to be. And a picture of a white elephant was actually the emblem of the Siamese flag until 1917. And then the monarch wanted to have a symmetrical design that worked at any angle because he had seen the original flipped on its head. So he had an elephant on its head. So he decided that he wanted something a little bit more flexible or versatile. But back to the white elephants, they may have been highly prized, but they were also, from one point of view, and certainly not from an animal lover's point of view, but from a monetary point of view, they were worthless because they had this special status that meant they couldn't become working animals, thankfully. And they also required a high level of maintenance and expense. And so it may be legend, but the story goes that successive kings of Siam would make a gift of a white elephant to anybody that they didn't particularly like or who had displeased them. And they did it in the full knowledge that keeping the animal would actually probably eventually bankrupt the recipient because they couldn't do anything with it, but they had to pay for this, this present from the king. They couldn't just neglect this poor animal. So to this day, a white elephant is any useless endeavour that essentially is more trouble than it's worth.
Very good. You are very good. You know so much. And I hope you have 3 special words that you know about that we possibly don't, that you can share with us to help us increase our vocabulary.
Yes, I will definitely try. Well, you know how I talk endlessly about the lost positives of language and how we need to bring those back. Well, actually, there are a few examples of lost negatives. So a reminder about the lost positives, it's things like ruth, gorm, wieldy, pecunious, etc., persona grata, all the ones that you could once be, but which we abandoned in favour of the negatives. Well, you could also be peccable, meaning you were prone to sin. So this joins maculate. Now, maculate means stained. Basically, the macula of your eye is almost like a stain in the middle of it. So you could once be maculate and you could be peccable, prone to sin. So forget impeccable and immaculate. These are rare examples of lost negatives. And I think we are all peccable, highly flawed, and it's a word that we should remember. Now, one of the words that I mentioned in my emotional dictionary, I love, and it's one of my resolutions really for this new year, is to do this more often. And it's from the Dutch, and excuse the pronunciation, uitween, which is UIT W-A-A-I-E-N, uitween.
Spell it again, U-I-T.
Yeah, W-A-A-I-E-N. Now, I know people aren't necessarily going to embrace that word, but hopefully they'll embrace the concept because it means to clear the mind in windy weather. It means to go to the top of the hill and we would say have the cobwebs blown away. It's essentially to stand in the face of the wind and feel invigorated and refreshed. And I love the idea of that.
Oh, I love it. Blowing away all those. That's so good.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. And finally, I'm going to end with that's quite hard to say, Lucocoli. Now, how am I going to say this? Lucocoli.
This is amusing. This is Susie Dent giving you her word of the week. She can't even get it out.
Lucocoli. Sounds a bit rude now. So this has only ever appeared once. So Leuco.
Leu.
C-O.
Yeah.
C-H-O-L-Y. And it appears to have been the creation of the 18th century poet Thomas Gray, and was used by him in a letter, and essentially was always his. And he says, "Mine, you are to know, is a white melancholy, or rather Lucocoli for the most part, though it seldom laughs or dances, nor ever amounts to what one calls joy or pleasure, yet is a good, easy sort of state, and a ça ne laisse que de s'amuser." In other words, it's a kind of okay, contented kind of state. So this he calls a white melancholy, and that gives you the clue, because the Leuco means white, and you will find it in leukemia, for example, as well, which is all about white blood cells. But I like the idea that there is a state that isn't quite melancholy, it's just a sort of very quiet state of being. And I think that's also quite a nice ambition for this year.
I think that's a very useful word. Because one doesn't always need to feel high.
No.
And you hope you don't feel melancholic, because that's a bit sad. But actually, leucocoly, that's the word, isn't it?
That's it. You're right, not leucocoly. Leucocoly, yes.
Leucocoly is a sense of, it's not melancholy. It's calmer than that. It's just a moderate feeling of quietness and stillness, a white mood. Oh, I like that.
A white mood. And I should have next time I will look up in the OED how to actually pronounce one of my trios, because I'm going to play it here. Oh, he says Lucocoli in the OED, and it's, as I say, got one record only from 1742. But as you say, it's neither dancing nor reveling, it's just simply a calm state of being.
And Lucocoli is an amusing way to say it. How are you feeling? Oh, a touch of the now I can't say it. A touch
I'm a bit
of the
leucocolic today.
No,
leucocolic. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Let's move on. Do you have a poem for us?
I have a poem, and this particular podcast, we download them on a Tuesday. And this is being downloaded on the 10th of January, 2023. But many people may be listening to it at some point in the future. If you're listening to it right now, on this particular day in January, you've got lots to look forward to, because we're going to be going back to the Fortune Theatre. Is it this? I think it's this Sunday, isn't it? And then we're going again next month as well. This is the Fortune Theatre in Covent Garden. So do come and join us there. It's a live show where we do this show, but live with real people. And purple people come from all over London, indeed all over the country, and sometimes from all over the world. So please come along, and you can find out more about it simply by putting in Something Rhymes with Purple live show, Fortune Theatre, and it'll pop up on your screen.
Yeah.
But this means it's the 10th of January. We're 3 days away from the 13th of January, which is St. Hilary's Day. Now, do you know anything about St. Hilary's Day?
I only know that it would probably have inspired Hilary Term in Oxford. Am I right? Or
you are right there.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's the day of St. Hilary, the 13th of January. It's traditionally in this country known as the coldest day of the year.
Oh.
Not because it always is, but because remarkably icy conditions mark the history of the day. And the nickname of the coldest day of the year for St. Hilary's Day can be traced back to the Great Frost of 1086.
Ooh.
But it is the big freeze of 1205 that cemented the day's reputation. And I know all this because I've been dipping into one of my favourite books, which is called A Poem for Every Day of the Year, edited by Ali Asiri and published by Macmillan. And it's one of those books I keep by the bedside because it has literally got a poem for every day of the year. And for the 13th of January, it's got one of my favourite poems by one of my favourite poets, who is also a neighbour of mine, and that's the great Roger McGough. So the weather was so icy at this time of the year in days gone by that people held frost fairs, and the River Thames regularly froze over. Londoners were able to skate on its surface. So the idea of St. Hilary's Day being the coldest day of the year goes back to at least the big freeze of 1205. But this is a more contemporary poem. It's called The Midnight Skaters. It is midnight in the ice rink, and all is cool and still. Darkness seems to hold its breath. Nothing moves until, out of the kitchen, one by one, The cutlery comes creeping, quiet as mice to the brink of the ice, while all the world is sleeping. Then suddenly a serving spoon switches on the light, and the silver swoops upon the ice, screaming with delight. The knives are high-speed skaters, round and round they race, blades hissing, sissing, whizzing at a dizzy pace. Forks twirl like dancers, pirouetting on the spot. Teaspoons, who take no chances, hold hands and giggle a lot. All night long the fun goes on, until the sun, their friend, gives the warning signal that all good things must end. So they slink back to the darkness of the kitchen cutlery drawer and steel themselves to wait until it's time to skate once more. At 8, the canteen ladies breeze in as good as gold to lay the tables and wonder why the cutlery is so cold.
Oh, I love that. That's a brilliant poem for children, actually, as well.
It's a great poem for children, for older people. It's so evocative, and it's by the great Roger McGough. Anyway,
love it.
If you want to read more of our poems, and if you are struggling with any of the spelling of Susie's trio ever,
or pronunciation,
you can find the in the programme description, which is beautifully put together by Harriet each week. There's a blurb which goes and tells you everything you need to know, the title, the author of the poem, and all the rest of it, and also to point you in the right direction of our live shows. So that's it for another one. We're coming up to our 200th, you know. It's amazing.
That is incredible. We hope that you will join us, and we know we have so many loyal listeners for whom we are incredibly grateful. So please do join us on the 31st of January for that 2000 episode, and please do keep writing in, because we love hearing from you.
Excuse me, did you just say 2000th episode? I mean,
did I? Oh my goodness.
I mean,
Will we
I
be
may
alive?
feel like that. It's rather like the former member of Parliament who said about Clement Freud, who said about giving up smoking and drinking. You don't live longer; it just feels longer. You feel we've done 2,000 episodes. We've got a long way to go before we've done 2,000. We will soon have done 200. That's quite enough to be going on.
I do apologise. I'm feeling a bit giddy. But please continue to follow us wherever you do get your podcasts. And we are on social media at Something Rhymes on Twitter and Facebook, or at Something Rhymes With on Instagram. Something Rhymes with Purple is a Something Else and Sony Music Entertainment production. It was produced by Harriet Wells with additional production from Chris Skinner, Ollie Wilson, Jen Mystery, Jay Beale, Teddy Riley. Well, he's not here, is he?
No, he is the master of Lucocoli, the very peccable Gully.